In this lecture, we are going to explore a feature called loops. There's one common scenario you will come across in your programming journey. You may want to output the entire collection of an array. Inside our script, there are 3 items in the array. Writing an echo statement for each item is possible but not scalable. If there were dozens of items, this process would become tedious. What if the array changes? Our echo statements would require constant updates. I don't feel like babysitting our code to correctly output the entire array. Luckily, we can avoid this scenario by using another feature called loops. PHP provides a feature for looping through the contents of an array. We can create a loop by typing the while keyword. Let's replace the echo statements with the while keyword. Next, we can add a pair of parentheses and curly brackets. A while loop is composed of 2 pieces. The first piece is the condition. Inside the parentheses, we must provide a condition for the loop. A condition will tell PHP to execute the code written inside the curly brackets. As long as the condition is true, the loop will run. I should provide a word of caution. It is possible to create an infinite loop. I highly advise against creating an infinite loop for various reasons. It can eat resources on your machine. Some hosts will even shut down your account if you attempt to create an infinite loop. Our goal is to loop through each item in the array. After the loop has gone through every value, it should stop running. First, we need to keep track of how many times the loop has executed the block of code. Above the loop, create a variable called count with a value of 0. Next, inside the condition, let's add the following: count less than count food. There are a couple of things to note about this condition. Firstly, we're using a function called count. The count function is defined by the PHP language. As its name suggests, it'll count the items in an array. This value is returned by the function. Secondly, we are comparing the count variable with the value returned by the count function. Initially, the count variable will be 0. There are 3 items in the array. Therefore, we can assume the condition will check if 0 is less than 3. This condition is truthy. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the documentation page for comparison operators. Out of the box, PHP provides dozens of comparison operators. As its name implies, comparison operators will compare 2 values. In our case, we're comparing if one value is less than another. You can view this table for a complete list of comparison operators. Feel free to play around with different comparison operators after you've finished this lecture. Let's go back to our editors. The condition will always be true. Therefore, we've created an infinite loop. We should update the count variable on each iteration. Inside the curly brackets, let's update the count variable to the count variable plus 1. Let's break down the behavior of the while loop. Initially, PHP will check the condition. If the condition is true, the code inside the block will execute. In our block of code, we're updating the count variable by adding 1. After the code has finished executing, the condition is checked again. This time, the count variable will be set to 1. 1 is less than 3. Therefore, the condition is true. Once again, the block of code will execute. Eventually, the count variable will not be less than 3. Our loop will stop running. This is the most important step. We should always stop our loop from infinitely running. Now that we've established a loop, let's try echoing the values from the array. Before updating the count variable, let's output the food array. Inside the square brackets, let's add the count variable. Instead of writing a raw value, we're using the count variable as the index. Conveniently, the count variable starts at 0. On each iteration, it'll update by 1, which gives us access to the next value in the array. If our theory is correct, we should be able to view all values in the array. Let's check out the browser. Perfect. We've rendered all items in the array. If we remove or add items, the page should be reflected with the changes. Currently, our code is not formatted, but that's alright. As long as all items are displayed on the page, we're good to go. Before I end this lecture, there's a shorthand syntax I want to show you. Go back to your editor. PHP has additional features for helping you write less code. Instead of updating the count variable, we can replace the assignment with 2+ symbols. 2+ symbols are called the increment operator. They perform the same action as incrementing a number by 1. There isn't a difference between the two solutions. However, most developers prefer this operator because it results in writing less code. Another shorthand syntax you should be aware of is for arrays. Let's replace the array function with square brackets. You don't need to use the array function to create an array. A pair of square brackets will create an array. Once again, either solution works. It's a matter of preference. Some developers prefer the array function because it gives clarity as to the type of value you're creating. We're finished with our discussion of arrays. I'll see you in the next lecture.